Morning, it's time for Beer Aware with the captain of beer from Hallertau, Steve Plowman, with us this morning. Good morning to you, Steve.
Good morning, Wammo.
And every week we're rattling through the various beer styles. And last week it was the Bock. And today we're moving on to light hybrid beer.
Yes.
Which there's a few variations under that.
There are a few, and the one we're looking at is the Kölsch, which is quite an interesting style of beer, and can sort of incorporate, sort of a generic sort of golden ale sort of style of beer.
Yep. Because I was saying to you just before that I thought Kölsch was a brand. Isn't there like a Kölsch bottle, or am I thinking of something else?
Kölsch is well, technically it's an appellation. So within Germany, to be called a Kölsch, it has to be brewed within the Cologne city walls.
Yep.
So there's only about 20 or so breweries that can actually brew an authentic Kölsch, and it has to be brewed. They've come up with a recipe, a fairly strict recipe that it has to be brewed under to be called a Kölsch. So it's the same as champagne, really. But the Germans don't really enforce it. So, you do get a few Kölsches brewed around the world, but to try and find an original, authentic Kölsch is quite difficult because most of them are consumed within Cologne, or a few that get out of never really leave Germany.
Now, it's a lighter beer, isn't it? So is it like a lager? Is it a lager?
Well, it's called a hybrid ale because it's warm fermented, so it's not a lager. It's using an ale yeast, but then they generally cold condition it to try and get it clean and crisp. And because the malt profile is lager malt, it's sometimes called a crossover between an ale and lager.
Right.
So, you could describe it as a German golden ale, a true Kölsch. But, it's brewed around the world with sort of local hops and malt. So you've got the specifications are the same. So you're looking for a beer which is quite golden in colour, moderate hopping, around 20 bitterness units, a little bit of hop aroma, a little bit of yeast aromatic, but quite a delicate, subtle style of beer. Quite gentle, just enough bitterness to sort of balance it and give it a nice clean finish.
Is it a type of beer that you would more notice the yeast characteristics rather than anything else?
Generally, the authentic traditional Kölsch from Cologne can be a little bit boring, to be honest. There's a strong culture around the beer in Cologne, and Kölsch is not only a beer; it's also a language.
Ah.
There's a local German dialect called Kölsch,
okay,
which is actually quite separate from the German language. It's a very old language, and the way they serve their Kölsch, you go to a Kölsch pub in Cologne,
yeah,
and that's the only beer there is, and they serve it in little 200ml tall glasses,
right,
and it's a really good system. Basically, you sit down, and the guy coming around with the beer comes around the big tray, with the glasses, and just keeps on giving you beer. As long as you're sitting there, he'll give you beer, puts a little mark on your coaster, and then when you've had enough, you put the coaster on top of your glass, and then they'll count up how many beers you've had, and then you pay.
Wow. Have you done that?
No, I never have. I've been close to Cologne, but I've never actually made it there.
Sounds like a good way of doing it.
It's great. You just sit there and just get delivered beer until you can't take any more.
I think that...
Always drink in moderation.
Yeah. No doubt it's big with tourists. But I've heard with these sort of places that there's this conflict between tourism and locals who, traditionally have done this down through the generations, and the tourists come in and see it as a bit of a gimmick and play the fool.
Well, there is a bit of that going on, but a lot of these pubs or these pubs attached to the breweries, they're not necessarily that easy to find. I think some of them are off the beaten track, and you do get a few commercial ones, sort of touristy sort of ones. But there's still like a really nice traditional underculture in Cologne of that's where the locals go, and that's the local beer, and that's what they drink all day. Yeah.
Don't be the fool and turn up in lederhosen at the pub.
No, it's not Bavaria.
Exactly.
You will get mocked.
Okay, let's look at our overseas example.
Well, the overseas example, the nearest I could find is, believe it or not, from Australia.
Wow, okay.
So this sort of ticks all the boxes in terms of the style specifications for a Kölsch, as the Cooper's Pale Ale.
But hang on. Cooper's Pale Ale. It doesn't say Cooper's light hybrid beer, does it? Or
no, it doesn't. And this is their version of a pale ale. But in terms of the style of the beer, the alcohol is 4.5%, which fits really well. The bitterness is sort of low, around 20. It's yeast-driven characters, mild hop. It's an Australian version of Kölsch, almost, if you like.
So could they enter this into the big beer competition under light hybrid beer, Kölsch?
Possibly, but the yeast characters are slightly different. So, I mean, what we're looking at here is basically an Australian version of a Kölsch-style beer. So you could say, well, you know, it fits the categories, but because they're using Australian hops and a slightly different yeast strain, it's different.
Okay.
But the overall style, in terms of the numbers, you know, it fits really well, fits the category.
All right, let's take a look at it first.
Okay.
First of all. And Cooper's got reasonable distribution around New Zealand these days.
They do. They make a lot of beer. I think they're definitely now Australia's biggest Australian-owned brewery, now that Foster's is sold to someone, can't remember who, and now that Lion Nathan's owned by the Japanese 100%.
Cheers. Are they still considered craft?
Well, no, that's a difficult one. I mean, Cooper's has never really promoted itself as a craft brewery. It's promoted itself as a family brewery. And it really was a regional brewery that sort of, you know, it's in South Australia, was a South Australian brewery, but now they've got really good national distribution and, you know, New Zealand and export. So in terms of a craft brewery, probably not, but in terms of the way they care about their beer, you know, their attention to traditional recipes and, you know, the family, it kind of, you know, it's different.
Okay, we're looking at it's very light in colour.
Very light in colour, nice golden colour. Wispy, nice, sort of nice head.
Quite clear as well.
Nice fruitiness on the nose. It's sort of like apples and pear. That's all coming from that Cooper's House yeast strain.
It's like very slight hop, not much. More
subtle hop, yeah.
More malt.
More malt and a little bit of yeast,
Mm.
which is, you know, fits the Kölsch style really well. Nice delicate malt character. Nice sort of fruitiness from the yeast.
Can taste that sort of pear in there as well. Very
Quite
fresh.
subtle. Very fresh, yeah. That's really delicious beer, I have to say. Delicate, subtle, just enough hops to finish, so the balance comes back in. And those yeast-derived characters are quite strong. That sort of apples and pear crossover thing, and that sort of subtle hop. There's that sort of little bit of, I don't know, how would you describe that hop character? It's quite subtle. It's really hard to pick up.
You sort of get the hop character right there on the finish, but and you can see why they do want to call it a pale ale, but you can see why it also fits into this other category.
Yeah,
this Kölsch category as well. It walks a fine line.
I mean, in today's sort of definitions of a pale ale, this doesn't really fit. There's not enough hops. There's not enough hops on the nose. It's not bitter enough.
That's right.
You know, it's too subtle.
We've been spoiled in New Zealand now with really, really hoppy pale ales.
That's a good thing about beer style definitions. They're not static. They sort of change and develop over time with the culture.
Okay, so that's nice, and it's nice to have an overseas beer that isn't off.
Yeah.
Or past its use by date. What's the local example?
This is one we brew at Hallertau, which is the number 1 Kölsch style ale. So again, this is based on very much the traditional Kölsch golden ale, but again, we're using New Zealand malt and New Zealand hops.
Interesting though, because if you go out to Hallertau, out to your place, and you say number 1, most people think that's the lager.
They do, because it looks like a lager.
Yeah.
And has a lot of similar characters, hence the name hybrid beer. But because of the warm fermentation, it's an ale. So the difference really makes itself known on the nose. You're getting a little bit of yeast fruitiness along with the hop fruitiness, and on the palate gives it more warmth, more richness.
Oh, really similar colours between the Coopers and the Hallertau.
Really similar.
Yeah.
Coopers has got a touch of haze there from the bottle conditioning.
Yeah.
But yeah, nice bright, really light gold colour.
Straight away, very different on the nose immediately. Got the hop.
The hop.
Yeah.
A little bit more hop in this one. So technically,
but you love the hop.
For the Kölsch style, I mean, the style guidelines say low to moderate hop aroma, moderate to none.
Definite fruit.
That's moderate. It's sort of encroaching on high hop aroma.
Definite fruit in there, but not the pear.
More passion fruit.
Yeah, definitely.
A little bit tropical.
Yep. Oh,
quite beer. Subtle on the palate.
Yeah.
A little bit of that maltiness in the middle.
Yeah.
And a little bit of fresh hops at the finish. Not too complicated.
Not too complicated, but a step up in freshness as well. We're even closer to the source, but
This was bottled on
not being
Tuesday
biased,
last
but
week.
it's definitely more. Yeah, was it? Yeah, it's definitely more to my taste.
So again, interpretation of that Kölsch style. I mean, Kölsch is becoming more and more popular in the UK and the US. It's just a nice alternative from people brewing a lager or a pilsner. You can brew a Kölsch, you can hop up a little bit.
Yeah,
get a little bit more going on.
I mean, this is summer. This is smooth and crisp.
Yep.
Really, really easy to drink in the sunshine. Lovely beer.
It is. I mean, technically, the Kölsch style falls into that lawnmower beer box.
Yeah.
If you've just spent 3 hours mowing the lawn in the sun and you're really thirsty, this style of beer is, you can quaff it. It's going to solve your thirst issues. You don't have to sit around and talk about it too much.
Yeah, indeed. Well, you'll find this as a video once more if you want to see the beers that we've just been talking about, and that'll be up at qfm.co.nz. I think Hallertau sometimes posting them on the Facebook page as well.
Up on Facebook.
Yeah, nice. Steve Plowman is the captain of beer at Hallertau, going through the various beer styles from week to week, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with this feature. Thanks very much, Steve.
My pleasure, Wammo.